Okay, so where are we? What defines the newness in the New Jerusalem? We've talked about the fact that it includes the full complement of God's people. Secondly, the inestimable worth of God's people. The inestimable worth of God's people. And what I mean by this, guys, is a consideration of the materials used to construct this city reveals it to possess a worth and value beyond all powers of comparison. So, for example, verse 18, the wall was built of jasper. Jasper was mentioned, don't you forget, in verse 11, defined there as a most rare jewel. The idea is a stone that is extremely expensive, so says a literary key to the Greek New Testament. While the city was pure gold, clear as glass. It's no surprising, it doesn't surprise you in any way to know that gold is one of the most prized resources known to human beings, a symbol of wealth and affluence and abundance. It can shine. We know that really nice gold can be reflective. But as we presently know gold, it in no way resembles the transparency of glass. In this vision, however, in this consideration of the church's beauty, John shatters the paradigm of our experience, guys. He does this a lot, by the way. You see it a lot in chapter 4, a couple of other places. In other words, he pushes us beyond the capacities of this first earth to convey the beauty of the bride in the eyes of her husband. And I would remind you that when something is transparent, that is to say, when you can see light passing through it, you can easily detect the slightest flaw, the slightest scratch or imperfection. But here there is none of that. This is transparent gold, John tells us. It's pure gold. The foundations of the wall of the city were adorned with every kind of jewel. The first was jasper, the second sapphire, the third agate, the fourth emerald, the fifth onyx, the sixth carnelian, the seventh chrysolite, the eighth beryl, the ninth topaz, the 10th chrysoprase, the 11th jacinth, the 12th amethyst. By the way, did you count how many gems are mentioned here? Anybody want to take a guess? 12. It's no surprise that 12 are mentioned. Now, what you may not be mindful of, it's just fresh in my mind because it was part of my quiet time recently, is that these precious gemstones were akin to those worn on the breastplate of the high priest, when he entered into the most holy place, the very presence of God. Exodus chapter 28. And what did those stones represent? On each one was inscribed the names of the tribes of Israel, God's bride. It's Peter himself who refers to Christians as living stones in God's temple. These stones that adorn the foundation of this city are symbols of God's people, likened here to precious gemstones to indicate the priceless value of each one to God. Verse 21, and the 12 gates were 12 pearls. Each of the gates made of a single pearl. Are these literal pearls? Well, if the measured wall back in verse 17 is literally 144 cubits high, that is 72 yards, then we have to think of a pearl the size of which would represent a gate proportional to 72 yards. If, however, the wall measured back in verse 17 is 144 cubits thick, and thus the wall of the city is 1,400 miles high, then we have to think of a pearl the size of which must represent a gate proportional to 1,400 miles. I wish you were laughing now. Pay your money and take your choice. In either case, I'd like to see the oysters in which these pearls grew. Don't be silly, guys. He's not talking about literal pearls. He's illustrating something for us. In the Greco-Roman world, a perfect pearl was worth more than its weight in gold. In fact, Jesus, as you know, spoke of a pearl so valuable that a merchant sold everything he possessed in order to buy it. Each of these gates is a single pearl. In other words, how could you begin to quantify the worth of this city? What's more, and the street of the city, notice not the streets, the street of the city was pure gold, transparent as glass. In this city, even the humble pavement underneath your feet is of incalculable value. But again, friends, I remind you, John is not talking about the physical components of a coming metropolis. This is not a literal city. These are not literal foundation stones. These are not literal gates. This is not a literal street. You are looking in a mirror. You are not a spectator. You are a spectator. You are a spectacle. All of it speaking of the infinite value and worth of the bride. Of infinite value to whom? Infinitely valuable to the one who determines value, the husband of the bride. Infinitely valuable to God and the Lamb, the ones responsible for our worthiness. And guys, it does seem to me that this ought to fill you with a sense of purpose as you consider the reason why you have come to seminary. I mean, unless you're here because you've got oodles of money to spend, time on your hands, and nothing to do but stimulate yourself intellectually, why are you here? Why are you making such sacrifices? Why are you taking your families through such difficulties? Why are you spending such an enormous amount of money? Because I'm telling you, someone who's been in the pastoral ministry for 32 years, you're never going to make it back. You are never ever going to be adequately compensated. I'm sorry. Why are you doing all of this? I hope it's because you intend to give your life to a thing of infinite value in the eyes of God Himself, the church. I remember years ago being at a Ligonier conference, and it wasn't R.C. Sproul, it was one of the other speakers there. And in a Q&A session, he was asked, somebody had submitted a question, here, 1,000 people. I'm a young guy, 27, 28 years old, sitting there. What are you doing now? He said, I used to be a pastor. Now I'm a seminary professor. Na, 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 na. I was absolutely, positively outraged. That's a step down. And you're talking to someone who walks in both worlds. It's a quantum leap down. To mock people who are in pastoral ministry. You can't despise the church. You can't marginalize the church. You can't give up on the church. Not when you consider what it is that the church means to God Himself. Not when you consider that she corporately, not me individually, is the treasured bride of Jesus Christ. You're not the bride of Christ. The object of His greatest affection is displayed by His sacrificial death for her life. It seems to me, guys, this ought to fill you with a sense of determination. That even now you will love the church and esteem the church and live out your life with the church in a manner that reveals your appreciation of the value of the church to God Himself, with a love and respect that anticipates her great and glorious destiny. It seems like your generation is being attacked at this level like at no other time, and I'm sure that's a bit exaggerated. I'm sure that's not altogether true. But I think this is something that you guys are getting bombarded with in a way that I was not bombarded with. And that is so profoundly unfortunate. And that's why, by the way, guys, as you step into pastoral ministry, that's why at least once a year I do a series on the church. As we look at the whole year of what it is we'll preach on Wednesday nights and Sundays, so basically 100 sermons. In the midst of all of that, I will do a series every year on the doctrine of the church. Why? Because people need to hear it over and 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 over again. And there are many different aspects of ecclesiology that you can come at for a nice short little series, 6, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, something like that. But if you look at the major areas of systematic theology, if you're going to think in those kind of categories, the 9 or 10 major areas of systematic theology, in my mind, the single most underdeveloped area is ecclesiology. And your people have no idea what the church is about or what the church needs to be doing. You cannot overemphasize this in our culture.